Once you get through this gate, you'll reach Liangzhou.
In 1963, the historian Edward H. Schaeffer published The Golden Peaches of Samarkand, a study that reimagines the Tang dynasty not through chronicles of war or governance, but through the shimmer of things. In his account, the empire, above all its capital, Changan, emerges as a cosmopolitan world in which goods and ideas from Central Asia, Persia, India, and beyond did not merely arrive, but were absorbed, transformed, and made to live anew. Schaeffer moves through this world by way of objects, fragments of matter that open onto vast cultural horizons. The golden peaches of Samarkand, invoked in his title, stand as emblems of this fascination with the foreign, rare, radiant, and touched by wonder. In historical terms, these so-called golden peaches likely refer to the yellow peach. Within the world of the game, however, they are reimagined as mysterious treasures of unfathomable power. In the years 635, 637, or perhaps 647, during the reign of Emperor Taizong of Tang, the ruler hailed by the steppe as the Heavenly Khan, envoys from Samarkand presented at court what were recorded as golden and silver peaches in tribute. Their form and hue astonished the people of Changan, for they evoked the myth of Shiwangmu, the goddess who presides over a western paradise where peaches confer immortality. Whispers spread that this treasure from Samarkand, called a peach, might confer longevity, stave off death, or even grant a taste of immortality itself. Half a century later, in 712, Emperor Xuanzong of Tang ascended the throne. A gifted musician, he established the Liyuan, the Pear Garden, in 714 as an imperial academy of music and dance. It is rendered in the game as the Masked Troupe. It brought together hundreds of musicians and palace women under the emperor's direction, with Xuanzong himself serving as both patron and instructor, guiding them in ritual music, song, and dance. Thereafter, the emperor entrusted the golden peach to the sect. By then, the mystery surrounding it had deepened beyond measure. No longer merely a fruit of immortality, it came to be regarded as a relic of immense, perhaps even perilous power, said to avert catastrophe and preserve an entire city from ruin. It is often said that the years from roughly 712 to 755, before the An Lushan Rebellion, marked the zenith of the Tang. Yet even in that age, the empire's northwestern marches were never wholly at peace. The lands of He and the western regions had long stood as a contested threshold, where the dynasties of the Chinese heartlands met the shifting powers of the surrounding frontiers. In the year 720, a small town in the western regions, home to a Kuchian musician named Bai Heli, was overrun. Bai Heli was absent when the calamity struck. Hastening back beneath the cover of night, he found his home laid waste, and from the ruins drew forth nothing but a pair of shoes his mother had made for him that very morning. To lose one's home and kin is a grief beyond measure. Yet life must go on. For Bai Heli, fortune, if it could still be called that, had placed him in the Kaiyuan era, when He and much of the western regions still lay beneath the shelter of imperial protection. And so, in the years that followed, the homeless musician wandered between the western regions and Chang'an, ever wearing the last pair of shoes his mother had left him, as though, so long as they endured upon his feet, neither his home nor his past had yet vanished from the world. It was in this same age that Bai Heli beheld He and the western regions rise into the busiest corridor beneath heaven. The Pipa of Kucha, the Jade of Khotan, the scriptures of India, and the glassware of Byzantium flowed without cease toward the empire's heart at Changan. In return, the capital sent forth silk and porcelain, and most precious of all, the semblance of peace. From Suyab stretched the lands guarded by the Ansi Protectorate, and within its beacon garrisons stood not only soldiers of the Tang, but also Turks and Sogdians, clad in the black robes of the empire, yet crowned with the turbans of their distant homelands. Further east, beyond Jade Gate Pass, lay the He Corridor, the great artery of the Silk Road, governed since 711 by the He Jiedushi, the empire's appointed guardians of the frontier. At its heart stood Liangzhou, a city first founded nearly a millennium before, now the seat of He command and an unrivaled cosmopolitan center. Sometime between 716 and 720, the reigning Heshi Jiedushi Liangzhou journeyed to Changan at the head of a musical troupe, offering before Emperor Xuanzong of Tang a dazzling array of melodies from the western regions. Among them was a singular composition wrought by the musicians as a vessel for the memory of their distant homelands. The emperor favoured it, but it was the people who embraced it more deeply still, for within its strains they heard an echo of their own longing. By around 727, this music, born in Liangzhou and the lands beyond, had begun its return, flowing outward once more from Changan, along the very routes from which it had come, binding distant places together in a shared remembrance that neither time nor distance could wholly erase. All these accounts speak to the prosperity of Liangzhou in that age. Yet before entering the city, let us turn aside to a more modest place, a humble yet bustling inn beyond its walls, long a resting point for merchants, musicians, and travellers crossing the region. In the year 725, the twin siblings Yuqi Qi and Yuqi Qing stopped there to rest as they journeyed to Changan on business. They hailed from Khotan, a key garrison state under the Anshi Protectorate in the southern Tarim Basin, and at the time among the greatest oasis kingdoms of the western regions. In childhood, the twins delighted in donning one another's guise, weaving small deceptions through the mirror of their likeness. On their way to Changan, they carried with them fragments of paper from their schooling. One such scrap was left behind at the inn, forgotten in the haste of departure. They had never grieved at the thought of leaving home, for they believed that as long as they remained together, no loss could truly find them. Yet fate would not be so easily denied. Yuqi Qi, the elder of the twins, passed away long before her brother, the cause unknown, leaving behind only silence where once there had been two. In the year 745, a merchant named Zhang Xuanjing set out from Ganzhou, bound for Liangzhou. Among those who travelled with his caravan was a dancer of 19 from a small Yagma tribe in Heshi, gifted in art, yet frail in body. Her destination, however, lay further east in Chang'an. She did not journey in pursuit of renown, but for a slender hope that within the empire's capital she might earn enough to sustain her family. At an inn beyond the walls of Liangzhou, she encountered Bai Heli, the Kuchean musician who had lost his home more than 20 years before, in 720. Now he journeyed once more toward the western regions, no longer as a musician, but as a merchant. From that meeting, a quiet acquaintance took root between them. As her stay at the inn drew to an end, the frail dancer, in her haste, left behind a small medicine vial within her chamber, an object slight in itself, yet destined perhaps to outlast its owner. 10 years later, in 755, the final year of the Tang's most radiant age, another musician of Khotan origin, Mi Jiaxin, journeyed from the western regions to Chang'an to visit a relative. With him travelled his son, Mi Jiale, a boy with a particular fondness for puffed grain. Passing through Liangzhou, they too took lodging at the inn. That same year, in December, the An Lushan rebellion broke out, an upheaval that would endure for 8 years and mark the great turning point at which the Tang passed from prosperity into slow decline. At that time, the masked troupe was led by Madame Gongsun. She sought to resist the forces of An Lushan with the sect, yet in the end could not prevail. Before retreating southward, she entrusted the Golden Peach to Guo Xin, then still a young man of promise. The following year, in the 6th month of 756, Chang'an fell. Emperor Xuanzong of Tang fled westward toward the Sichuan Basin, while the inhabitants of the capital scattered in all directions. Yet one person chose to remain. Perhaps sensing that her time was drawing to its end, or burdened by a body grown too frail for flight, the Yagma dancer who had once stayed at the inn outside Liangzhou resolved to stay behind. She left a final letter, entrusting it, together with the 62 taels of silver she had saved over the years, to a friend preparing to return to the western regions, asking that they be carried back to her homeland. That friend was none other than Bai Heli. But Bai Heli too found himself trapped in Chang'an, unable to depart until 757, when forces led by Guo Xin's uncle, Guo Ziyi, and others recaptured the city from the rebels. Only then did he manage to leave. Along the way, he sought out the homeland the Yagma dancer had once spoken of, only to find that the small tribe had already vanished without a trace, too slight, too fragile to endure in a land long marked by turmoil. With nothing left to recover, Bai Heli continued on his journey. When he passed once more by the small inn outside Liangzhou, memory stirred. He stepped inside, the very place where he and the Yagma dancer had first met when he was not yet old, and, in the room where she had once stayed on her journey to Changan, laid down the silver and the letter she had entrusted to him. Then he entered another chamber, perhaps the one he himself had once occupied, and removed the old, blood-stained shoes from his feet. Perhaps he, too, had suffered some mortal wound in the war-torn lands of Hershey. Or perhaps, knowing he no longer had a home to which he might return, he chose to leave them behind. Meanwhile, as Emperor Suzong of Tang redeployed troops from Hershey and the western regions to secure the heartlands against the rebels, the Tibetans seized their moment and pressed upon the Tang frontiers. At first, their advances came in scattered incursions, seizing a fort here, occupying a city there. Unable to turn back west, Tang forces could only yield ground again and again. What followed was the unraveling of the Hershey corridor. One city after another fell, as though a line of dominoes had been set in motion long before. In Dunhuang, where the Jade Gate Pass of the Han once stood, and which in the Tang era was known as Shazhou, there lay an old military relay station called the Celestial Spring Post. When Tibetan incursions reached the region, a courier named Hong Yu set out from this post, resolved to carry word of the crisis all the way to Changan. Yet along the journey he was captured by Tibetan forces and would not reach the capital until some 40 years had passed. Around 765, General Guo Xin departed from Changan and made his way to the Anxi Protectorate. From that moment, the Golden Peach was borne once more toward the western regions. Soon, the road that bound the western regions to Changan was severed. Cut off and isolated, the Anxi and Beiting protectorates could do little but dispatch envoys northward, seeking a tenuous path to the capital by way of the Uyghurs, while holding their ground as best they could. In Anxi, command gradually passed into the hands of Guo Xin. Faced with little hope of relief, he did not yield. While leading his forces against mounting threats and preserving what order he could, he also turned to the people, organizing them to secure the means of their survival. In a place known as Horsehelm Village, the inhabitants suffered under a relentless scarcity of water. Though they had long considered abandoning their land in search of more certain sources, they could not bring themselves to forsake the soil on which they had been raised, nor the fields their forebears had labored to wrest from the earth. When Guo Xin learned of their plight, he provided them with a survey map marking the hidden water table beneath the land, sustained by the melting snow of the surrounding mountains. If the water could be found and a subterranean channel cut to draw it into the village, Horsehelm would no longer live in fear of drought. Under the guidance of the Anxi soldiers stationed there, the villagers set to work, digging in accordance with the map. Yet they did not know that this undertaking would demand the labor and the sacrifice of 4 generations before it would at last be brought to completion. It was perhaps during this same period that Guo Xin came to know a Sogdian merchant named Kang Zhenju. A seasoned trader, she had long lived as a wanderer of the sands, crossing paths with all manner of people across the western regions, even in times of conflict. She came to Guo Xin seeking to secure a pact, one that would grant her and her caravan safe passage through the watch of the Anxi army, as she had done with other powers along her road. Resolute in temperament, she held that all things must ultimately be reckoned in terms of profit. And yet, the determination of Guo Xin and the Anxi army to hold their ground in the western regions both confounded and impressed her. In time, they came to an accord. Kang Zhenju would draw upon her networks and influence to provision the Anxi forces, while the Anxi army would aid her in establishing a place of settlement, a home, amid the barren frontiers of the desert. As time passed, a rumor began to circulate through the region that Guo Xin's power to hold the frontier against his enemies did not lie in strategy or resolve alone, but in the Golden Peach, and that its true giver was no longer Madame Gongsun of the masked troupe, but Kang Zhenju herself. Guo Xin even refused to return the Golden Peach to Kang, in quiet defiance of their agreement. And yet, this shadow did not break the bond between them. Instead, Kang Zhenju found her thoughts turning ever more often toward Changan. She could not help but wonder why her companions clung to it so fiercely, even as they chose to remain upon a frontier far removed from its reach. At last, bearing Guo Xin's charge, she set out upon the long road to Changan. In 781, Kang Zhenju at last reached Changan. She brought before the Tang court news that the Anxi and Beiting protectorates still endured in the distant west. The court was struck with astonishment, yet by then it was no longer possible to dispatch reinforcements, for the empire's military strength had been drained into the hands of the regional military governors, the Jidushi. Kang Zhenju continued her journey through the Chinese heartlands, a land she had never before beheld. The prosperity of the fertile Central Plains and Jiangnan, even in an age already touched by decline, still dazzled her. Yet as she turned again to the question that had once set her upon the road to Changan, she began to understand why the idea of home held such power over Guo Xin and the Anxi army, and what home had come to mean for her as well. In the end, she returned to the western regions, to the land she had once traversed as a wanderer but had in time come to recognize as her own. Despite all their efforts, the lands they guarded dwindled year by year. In time, Guo Xin and Kang Zhenju came to a final accord. She would once more journey to Chang'an, bearing with her a roster of those who had fallen in defense of the western regions for the Tang, and deliver their names to their kin, so that they might know what their loved ones had died for. She urged Guo Xin to depart with her, but the general only replied that he was already there. His name, too, inscribed among the dead she carried home. When she reached her destination, Kang Zhenju made a decision of her own. The fortune she had amassed through years of trade she now dispersed among the families of the fallen, as though to offer some measure of solace to those who had once laboured beside her in building and defending that other homeland in the western regions. As before, she did not remain. She, too, had grown old, and she knew that Chang'an was not her home. Yet when she returned, the Anxi protectorate had already fallen. At last, she came to rest in the land she had long called home. These are the stories that take place around the year 808. Meanwhile, stirred by tales of the Anxi army, a Jianghu swordswoman named Yang Xiaohu set out from the Chinese heartlands for the Anxi protectorate in the western regions, hoping to stand with its forces in defense of the frontier. By the time she arrived, however, the army she had hoped to join was already no more. Undeterred, she continued her resistance alone, and in time came to be known among the Tibetans as an outlaw of the desert. One day, beyond the walls of White Crown Fortress, Yang Xiaohu encountered a band of surviving Anji soldiers, reduced to captivity. Bearing coffins upon their backs, they sought to carry the bodies of their fallen comrades on foot all the way to Changan. Without hesitation, she joined their company. Near the Celestial Spring Post, they were overtaken by enemy forces. Yang Xiaohu remained behind to hold them at bay, and there she fell. Of their number, only 9 men would reach Chang'an. They petitioned the Tang court to dispatch an army to reclaim Anxi, but beset by turmoil within and threats without, the court could offer no aid. And so, in the Taihang Mountains, they broke their spears and swore an oath that one day they would return to the western regions. Years later, one of their disciples, Guo Huili, founded the sect known as Raging Tide, and from that time onward carried their unfulfilled vow into future generations. History tells us that their hope would not be fulfilled for centuries to come. Yet, from their legacy, there arose the Yang clan of Liangzhou, a renowned frontier-defending warrior lineage of the Song dynasty, which, in the years following 960 CE, would stand as a bulwark of the Chinese heartlands against the Khitans and the Tanguts. In 809, nearly 40 years had passed since the courier Hong Yu set out from the Celestial Spring Post for Changan, bearing his report. Along the way, he was taken captive by Tibetan forces. After long years of imprisonment, he at last found an opportunity to escape. Yet when he finally reached Chang'an, stripped of all proof of his identity, he was mistaken for a Tibetan spy, imprisoned, and later exiled to the south. Within his cell, Hong Yu wept and pleaded his innocence. In time, his case drew notice. A sympathetic figure set his story into verse, and thus the message he had carried from her Shi was at last made known. 40 years had passed. The news he bore was already out of date, yet not without worth. At that time, the man upon the throne was Emperor Xianzong of Tang. Under his careful governance, the Tang Empire entered a brief period of renewal, and many long-standing afflictions began to ease. Yet this resurgence did not endure. In 820, the emperor died suddenly. One account holds that, in his pursuit of immortality, He had long consumed elixirs laced with heavy metals and was ultimately undone by them. Other accounts hold that the eunuchs, chafing under the limits imposed upon their power, were responsible for his death. As the empire once more drifted toward crisis, a disciple of the masked troupe named Lan He resolved to journey west in search of the Golden Peach, a relic said to possess the power to preserve the realm. Guided by a map that Hong Yu had brought to Changan years before, he made his way into the western regions. For years he wandered among the ruins of the Anxi Protectorate, evading pursuit while seeking even the faintest trace of the Golden Peach, until at last, within White Crown Fortress, he found it. Yet with its discovery came fiercer pursuit still. In the end, as he turned back toward Changan, the Golden Peach was lost in the chaos of an attack. Lan He himself was gravely wounded, and from that moment on, was left scarcely able to speak. In my previous video, I suggested that the story of the burlap sack took place earlier, around 780 CE, based on the date recorded on his travel permit. Here, however, we will consider another possible timeframe, drawing upon several additional clues. Since the fall of the Hershey Corridor in the late 760s, Guo Xin had repeatedly attempted to re-establish contact with Changan, sending back whatever might be of use to the homeland. After the fall of the Anxi Protectorate, some of its surviving soldiers and the children they left scattered across the region continued to carry out this mission. Around 835 CE, a small group of Tang soldiers set out towards the Chinese heartland, carrying with them a sack of cotton seeds bound for Changan. At the time, ordinary people relied on reeds or hemp fibers to pad their winter clothing, materials far inferior to cotton in retaining warmth. The road to Changan was fraught with danger. Before long, the group was ambushed, and its members fell one by one along the way. Only a single man on the verge of death managed to reach a relay station still manned by a handful of soldiers. There, he entrusted the seeds to the 3 men who remained. They took up the task, but misfortune soon befell them as well, until only one man was left to carry the mission forward, an aging stable master named Liu Sanyang. Joining a caravan, Liu Sanyang adopted the name burlap sack to avoid drawing unwanted attention. Even so, the caravan was attacked and he was ultimately abandoned. Fortunately, Liu Sanyang was later taken in by a village, where he was introduced to an underground channel system that connected the fields to a subterranean aquifer. There is no explicit record identifying this village. However, given that the Jianghu Legacy quest, A Wellspring of Hope, was released prior to the burlap sack storyline on the Chinese server, and that her Jin at the end of that story implies that no other villages in the region had constructed such underground water channels, it is reasonable to assume that the village which took in Liu Sanyang was none other than Horsehelm Village. Had it not been for the persistent labours of generations past, this place would never have come into being. Liu Sanyang would never have reached Blackwater Post, and Xiao Lian would likely have perished there, whereupon the chain of events that would one day lead to Liangzhou would never have come to pass. In 835 CE, though the Kaiyuan Golden Age had long since passed, Changan remained the city before which the surrounding realms still paid homage. Across the sea, in Japan, a commission appointing envoys to the Tang court was entrusted to a young man named Fujiwara no Sadatoshi. From an early age, Sadatoshi had loved music and was especially devoted to the pipa. After several failed voyages, he finally set foot on Tang soil in 838. The Japanese embassy that year was large in scale, yet owing to instability within the Tang court, only 34 members were allowed to proceed to Changan. Sadatoshi, along with the others, was detained in Liangzhou for a time. When he finally reached Changan, he sought out a renowned pipa master named Liu Erlang, earnestly requested instruction, and mastered the repertoire within only a few months. In 839, as Sadatoshi prepared for his return home, Liu Erlang presented him with 2 pipa. These instruments were later received into the imperial collection in Japan and preserved within the palace. Yet another version of this story survives. According to this account, Sadatoshi did not learn the pipa in Changan, but in Yangzhou. During his enforced stay there, the local authorities assigned a court musician named Lian Chengwu to instruct him at Kaiyuan Monastery. When Sadatoshi departed, Liangzhou presented him not with 2, but 3 pipa, named Xuanxiang, Qingshan, and Shiziwan, rendered in the game as Lion's Mane. On his voyage back to Japan, Sadatoshi encountered violent storms at sea, and the pipa Lion's Mane was lost to the waves. Thus, he returned carrying only Xuanxiang and Qingshan. In the Liangzhou melody story, Lian Daozi's grandfather, Lian Erlang, emerges as a composite figure drawn from 2 strands preserved in the historical record, Liu Erlang and Lian Chengwu. In 835, the same year Sadatoshi was appointed envoy in Japan, Lian Erlang, then about 20, departed from Changan, setting out toward Jade Gate Pass in the He corridor. Passing through the Liangzhou region, he too lodged at that small inn beyond the city, the one already steeped in stories. You may already have discerned that through the memories and dreams of Lian Daozi, his grandfather Lian Erlang is in fact the same figure as Xiaolian in the burlap sack tale, if that story is indeed to be dated to around 835 rather than 780. After being rescued by Liu Sanyang at Blackwater Station, he too eventually made his way to Changan. Yet in 835 he chose to turn westward once more, ostensibly in search of his family in the lands not far from Jade Gate Pass. From that time onward, Lian Erlang remained in He for many years. During that time, he may have returned to Changan. Or perhaps he never did. Yet in his heart, he always reckoned that half of him belonged to Changan. Sometime in Shazhou, near the site where the Jade Gate Pass had first been established in the Han Dynasty, Lan He came to know a local youth of his own age named Zhang Yichao. The two quickly grew close, and it was likely through Lan He that Zhang Yichao first learned of the Golden Peach and the myths that had gathered around it. In time, they succeeded in locating the treasure, retrieving it from the Bochen people. Together, they attempted to return to Changan, yet found their path barred at Dasan Pass. In the end, Lan He chose to entrust the Golden Peach to Zhang Yichao. In 848, as the Tibetan Empire declined amid internal strife, the people of He, long subject to Tibetan rule, rose in revolt under the leadership of Zhang Yichao. Zhang Yichao's forces swiftly captured the prefectural seat, driving the Tibetan commander into flight. To report this victory to Changan, Zhang dispatched multiple groups of envoys across enemy-held territory. Only one, after 2 arduous years, succeeded in reaching the capital. The court named his forces the Guiyi Army, literally, the army of returning righteousness. Soon, Zhang Yichao and the Guiyi Army gradually recovered 11 prefectures of the He region, restoring the Silk Road to passage once more. In 851 CE, his brother, Zhang Yitan, travelled to Changan as a hostage of loyalty, a common practice at the time. Around 860, Lian Erlang, now 45, once again departed from the region of Jade Gate Pass, setting out on the long road back to Changan. It was during this journey that he claimed to have encountered an immortal, who promised that from that moment onward he would be granted 3 chances to leave his name in history. Whether this was a romantic embellishment of his travels, or merely a vision conjured in a dream, we cannot know. Yet on this occasion, Lian Erlang did not travel beyond Liangzhou. This may be partly explained by the fact that Zhang Yichao had not yet secured the city until the following year. From a letter Lian Daozi once intended to write to his grandfather, it appears that Lian Erlang had, at some point, resided in Liangzhou for many years. This period may well have been one of them. In 861, Liangzhou was finally restored to Tang control when Zhang Yichao and the Guiyi Army seized the city. 6 years later, around 867, when news of Zhang Yitan's death in Changan reached He, Zhang Yichao resolved to journey to the capital himself, serving as a hostage of loyalty in place of his brother for the sake of his family and the stability of He. Before his departure, he entrusted the Golden Peach to his successor and nephew, Zhang Huaishen, the son of Zhang Yitan. Zhang Huaishen was 36 when Zhang Yichao departed for Changan. In his youth, he had entered the Raging Tide and trained under its first sect leader, Guo Huaili, a close confidant of Zhang Yichao, and himself the disciple of one of the 9 surviving soldiers of the Guiyi Army, men who, half a century earlier, had reached Changan bearing the ashes of their fallen comrades. When Zhang Huaishen later rose to command the Guiyi Army, he chose to conceal his identity as a disciple of the Raging Tide, for the sect adhered to a code that shunned entanglement with official power. Zhang Huaishen's career was marked by continual trials. He repelled repeated incursions by the Uyghurs, yet the greater challenges arose from within, and from the Tang court itself. Having long endured the upheavals wrought by rebellious Jiedushi, the regional military governors dispersed across the empire, the court dared not risk granting full recognition to yet another powerful frontier commander. Thus, despite Zhang Huaishen's repeated petitions, the court refused to bestow upon him the official insignia of Jiedushi. This enduring mistrust may not have been born of malice, yet it nonetheless eroded Zhang Huaishen's authority within the Guiyi Army, if not undermining the legitimacy of the Guiyi regime itself. Though dark currents stirred beneath the surface, Zhang Huaishen's command over the Guiyi Army remained, by and large, resolute and unshaken. Under his watch, the lands of He held fast to a fragile peace, as though steadied by an unseen hand against the tides of disorder. In the year 870, amid a fragile calm, Lian Erlang brought his grandson, Lian Daozi, to Liangzhou to visit their kin. The boy's earliest years had been steeped in the melodies and tales of Changan, and after his mother's passing, he grew ever closer to his grandfather until he, too, came to regard himself as half a son of that distant capital. A few years later, as Lian Daozi came of age in Shazhou, 2 children were born in Liangzhou. One was An Liuli, who was raised among the wandering fold of the pocketless circus. The other was Chao Jingguanyin, born beneath the eaves of a distinguished gentry house. As has been noted, the house to which she belonged would, in time, ascend to prominence within the Guiyi Army under the leadership of Chao Yijin. By the reckoning of years, Chao Yijin was likely of an age with Chao Jingguanyin, or perhaps only a few years her senior. Yet even then, one might wonder whether the seeds of future dominion had already begun to stir, unseen, within the quiet passage of their childhood. Another decade passed. By 880, Lian Erlang had reached the age of 65. Though he had long named himself a man of Changan, it was in He that the greater part of his life had quietly unfolded, as if the land had claimed him without ever asking. Sensing that his years were drawing to their close, he resolved, once more, and this time for the last, to return to Changan. In May, he approached Liangzhou, lodging again at that same modest inn, as though retracing the fading footprints of his former self. Yet from the outset, this final journey was shadowed by unease, for the empire itself had begun to fracture. Since 875, the rebel leader Huang Chao had risen against the Tang court, and the fires of rebellion spread ever closer to the heartland. 5 years later, while Lian Erlang was still in Liangzhou on his homeward journey, word reached him that Changan had fallen. The city he had carried in memory, luminous and intact, was no more. And so, before he could complete his journey, he passed away in Liangzhou, his return forever unfinished. In those final days, fate brought him into the path of An Liuli, then only 7 years of age. Enchanted at once by his deft tricks and quiet skill, she pleaded to be taken as his pupil, and he agreed. Some 10 years later, it would be these very skills that An Liuli would use to aid Cao Jingguanyin in her escape from the Cao household, freeing her from a marriage she had never chosen. Somewhere in Liangzhou, the Amit family of 3 made their living by brewing wine, leading a quiet and untroubled life. But as the situation in He grew increasingly unstable, that fragile peace was shattered. At a banquet hosted by Utuk nobles, the father, who had gone to present his wine, was slain on a whim, simply because a lord happened to be in a foul mood. His eldest son, who had accompanied him, narrowly escaped death, only to be imprisoned and forced into servitude as an assassin. Left behind in the silence of the Amit household was the younger daughter, Ainur. Devoured by grief, solitude, and a slow burning fury, her mind began to fracture, slipping into visions that blurred vengeance and memory. In those illusions, she saw herself avenging her kin, striking down the Utuk noble whose cruelty had undone her family. In reality, she fell from the heights of a lonely tower. By a turn of fate not yet spent, she was found and rescued by a monk who carried her away from that place of sorrow. Her brother, however, walked a darker path. Taken and bound by forces beyond his choosing, he was, in time, sent to kill Zhang Huaishen, the commander of the Guiyi Army. Whether he survived that mission or vanished like so many others into the dust of the Hershey winds remains a silence the story has never broken. After the passing of his grandfather, Liangzhou found himself a stranger beneath his own roof. His father, driven by the harsh calculus of survival in Hershey, had chosen to recast his very being, assuming the guise of one of the so-called foreigners, and severing piece by piece the sinews that bound him to his native land. He took a wife from the western regions, a woman estranged from the tongue of the Chinese heartlands, and in time came to disavow even his own speech. To such a man, Liangzhou, still clinging to a past that could never be reclaimed, and the peeper left behind by Lian Erlang, an echo of Changan's music, became little more than lingering encumbrances. In a moment of anger, he declared that if the instrument would not be sold, then the young man himself must depart. This time, Liangzhou did not yield. Gathering the peeper into his arms, along with the fading traces of his grandfather and that distant home called Changan, he stepped onto the road, for it alone would now receive him. As he passed near Liangzhou, a sandstorm descended. Blinded and battered, he sought refuge in a forsaken inn. There, in that place abandoned by time, he fell into a dream at once strange and resplendent. Within it, he encountered a girl who seemed to bear the shape of the self he had long pursued in silence, as though she were an illusory embodiment of his grandfather's peeper, the last companion he possessed. Together, they drifted backward into another age, into the height of the Tang's glory, where those who had once gathered, feasted, and lingered beneath that very humble roof more than a century before seemed, for a fleeting moment, to live again. When the dream receded and the sandstorm at last withdrew its veil, Liangzhou resumed his journey, turning his steps toward Liangzhou. Within the walls of Liangzhou, that very day marked the appointed hour of Cao Jingguanyan's marriage. Yet none within the household knew that she had already slipped beyond the city with Liuli's aid. The two had long agreed upon their design, and Liuli would assume her place as the bride in red, and when the moment revealed itself, she would steal away in silence to meet her. From there, they would depart together for Changan, leaving behind all that sought to bind them. Cao Jingguanyan's grandmother soon discerned, through Liuli's implication, that the veiled bride was not her granddaughter. Nevertheless, she chose silence over exposure and, at Liuli's request, ordered the bridal procession to take a different route, thereby shaping events in the girl's favor, though her reasoning remained unknown. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as though even fate might be persuaded. Yet what had already begun to gather in the shadows would not be so easily turned aside. That night, within the residence of the Jiedushi, Zhang Huaishan, together with his wife and their 6 sons, was murdered as a web of conspiracies tightened and unseen forces closed in upon the household. The man who had guarded Hershey for more than 2 decades fell at last to treachery, and with his death, Liangzhou was cast in an instant into chaos. Cao Jingguanyan's grandmother, the servants of the Cao household, and Liuli all perished in the turmoil, leaving Cao Jingguanyan alone somewhere not far from Dasan Pass. Meanwhile, as Liangzhou burned, Liangzhou entered the city. Though shaken by the disorder, he felt no impulse to flee with the panicked crowds. Instead, he walked against the current, making his way toward the tower his grandfather had once spoken of, a place not high enough to behold the homeland, yet high enough to draw every gaze, unbidden, toward the direction from which one had come. Ascending to its roof, the now homeless Liangzhou raised his peeper and began to play the Liangzhou melody, the song once carried by Hershey musicians to Changan, the song that bore their homesickness across the vast distances and returned it, in echoes, to Liangzhou, the very song his grandfather had played for him long ago. In that moment, neither fear nor sorrow could reach him. So long as the music endured, he too remained at home.